Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, we're picking back up again with Spider-Man, which is the conclusion of the story where Peter Parker meets Miles Morales for the very, very first time, right? Peter Parker from the main Marvel Universe meets the Ultimate Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And the whole idea behind this is that we pick up with Peter Parker following his kind of encounter alongside Miles with Mysterio, who basically used a kind of robot version of himself to move into the Ultimate Universe or to travel to the Ultimate Universe. Peter Parker has essentially traveled to meet the Ultimate Universe's version of Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane Watson. Now keep in mind, the last time they saw Spider-Man, it was their version of Peter Parker and he died. And largely there was just kind of the grieving process that went into it. Now, one of the things that we talked about in the early Miles Morales comics that we did is that there did come a point when Miles took on the Spider-Man costume and was met by Aunt May and Gwen Stacy. And they were kind of like, look, if you're gonna do this, understand that you're living up to a legacy much bigger than yourself, right? You don't just simply put on the Spider-Man costume and do your thing. You're living up to the legacy that my nephew created, and you stand for everything he stood for. So this is not a thing to take lightly, right? So it was kind of, initially they were against it, but it's one of these things where it's kind of like, okay, you know, we can sort of get on board once they realize the character of Miles Morales and what he had to offer. But the problem with this is that when Peter shows up, he's wearing the original Spider-Man costume. And as soon as Aunt May sees this, she gets pissed, right? Because he basically showed his face. And her thought is that it's some kind of a joke, right? Gwen Stacy shows up and starts kicking the crap out of Peter Parker, thinking that he's pulling a stunt too. And it's not until Miles shows up and says, no, it's really actually Peter, right? It's not somebody pulling a trick or something like that, not somebody being a jerk. I don't really know of a reasonable human being that would show up on the doorstep of a woman and like basically two chicks who lost somebody close to them dressed as that person, right? I mean, if somebody were to do that, I would I would stand by and just watch them get the crap kicked out of them. I'd record it and then just be like, yeah, man, this guy kind of had it coming. Like, that'd be my response. I'd be like, yeah, man, like they were kind of a dick. They sort of had this coming, right? Nobody do anything. Let them get their just desserts. But this is actually Peter, right? This is actually Peter Parker here. And when Miles comes to his rescue, that's when Aunt May and Gwen Stacy basically start to listen, right? And Peter's initial response is like I thought initially I died. I thought something happened. Like I didn't really know what was going on, how I ended up here. You know, I've only recently been putting the pieces together. I never should have come here, right? I never should have come here to this place. You know, I'm sorry I did this to you. And then basically Aunt May passes out, right? Now at that point, we switch over to the Ultimate Universe Tony Stark and Nick Fury, right? Now Nick Fury we've talked about before. Ultimate Universe Iron Man, we've never really had a big discussion about. One of the big things to understand here is that Ultimate Iron Man, when he first showed up, was designed to be a more grounded version of Tony Stark from the main Marvel Universe, right? So not as intelligent, because even Tony in the main Marvel Universe, his intelligence, even for the realm of comics, borderline's questionable, right? Like how could a person possibly be that smart? This version of Tony is really smart, but he is a version of intelligence we would expect to see here in the real world, right? Hence the nature of the Ultimate Universe, kind of reflection of the real world the way it exists now. And so he's not really able to pick up or really figure out what's going on with Mysterio's character, right? How to reverse engineer the circuitry, where the signal's coming from, all that kind of stuff. The reality of this is there's an infinite number of universes out there, right? And Tony just doesn't have the ability to trace his signal back to its origin point. Now, if this were in the main Marvel Universe, the main Marvel Tony Stark would have figured it out like that, right? He would have figured it out so fast because it's what the story called for. But the idea of the Ultimate Universe was to write more realistic stories, right? And really, if you're talking about an infinite number of universes, there really wouldn't be a way to trace the signal all the way back to its origin point, because it's not like it's a rope that leads from the main Marvel Universe and all they have to do is just follow the breadcrumbs to get to its location. It doesn't really work that way, at least not for anybody here. And so at the end of the day, Tony doesn't really have any answers here. He's like, the only way for me to really get some answers is to talk to that alternate reality version of Spider-Man, to talk to Peter Parker. It's the only way for me to really figure out what it is that's going on here. Now, the funny comment he makes is, I'm surprised that you let Miles Morales run around with Peter Parker, right? I figured you would have cracked him over the head, thrown him into a hole, and basically grabbed like the main Peter and done the same thing, right? Kind of, kept Miles Morales under wraps so that he wouldn't really have any idea what's going on, and then basically took Peter and just kind of locked him up. But the idea behind this is that Fury really feels a bit of, regret when it comes to Peter, right? Peter was never properly trained to become a superhero. He was never properly trained. He was never really inducted the way that he was supposed to be. He was just kind of allowed to do his thing. And that led to his eventual death. And Nick Fury felt a lot of responsibility for that. That's why when you go and you read made Cataclysm that there's a lot of focus put on Nick Fury and the guilt he feels for the death of Peter Parker, because when he could have trained him or he could have helped him to become a better hero, he didn't. Instead, it was just kind of him doing his thing. And so with that guilt in mind, along with promises that he made, it's kind of like, we're just going to let them work it out together, right? Which is actually the right move. The best move for Nick Fury to make is really for Peter, Aunt May, Gwen Stacy to all kind of come to terms with this on their own. And so once Aunt May wakes up, you basically have Peter like telling stories, to Miles and to Gwen Stacy, them sharing stories with him, that kind of a thing, and kind of going back and forth, right? And Peter's coming to this realization, there's massive differences between this reality and the one that he's from. Now, we as the reader know that. One of the funny things that goes on is Gwen Stacy kind of starts poking and prodding and is like, is there a version of me in your universe? And Peter's like, yeah, but she's a little bit older than you are. She's about my age. And she's like, well, I mean, like, are you dating her? And Peter's like, I mean, not really. Like, I'm basically dating Mary Jane Watson, right? Which is what Gwen Stacy calls. And then as soon as this kind of explanation goes on that Mary Jane is like a supermodel, which she's not in the Ultimate Universe, right? She's just like a nerdy girl. And when it's like she's a supermodel and all that kind of stuff, like Gwen Stacy's kind of shocked to find out that like Mary Jane Watson is this hugely popular, world-renowned model. And it's kind of like, wow, that's a little crazy. But when she starts asking, what about me, right? Like, what am I then? Like, what's going on with me? Peter's like, we should probably talk about something else. I don't have the heart to tell you that the Green Goblin threw you off a bridge and I shot my webbing at your foot and broke your neck in the process, because that's basically what happened. I don't care what anybody says. She was not dead before Spider-Man got there. I don't care what anybody says. But, it's kind of an interesting thing, because it's like, there are parts of his reality he doesn't really want to divulge, because who knows how Gwen Stacy would react if it was like, well, you're dead and I'm the reason why. Then it's kind of like, get out of this house, right? I don't want you here. But it's really kind of new to her to learn, or really fascinating for her to learn that there's whole other worlds and dimensions out there. Now, for her part, Aunt May is a lot more reserved here, right? She's not nearly as excited as Gwen Stacy is. She's kind of bracing herself for the idea that it's not actually Peter Parker. That it's like, well, we don't really know if it's Peter Parker. We don't really know if it's him, right? We don't know if that's the case. It could be somebody else pretending to be him. Now, in fact, like, it really is him. We know that. Miles Morales believes it. Gwen Stacy believes it. But Aunt May's doing this because in her heart of hearts, if she gives into this and then it turns out to be false, she'd lose it, right? Like, it would just be the most crushing experience. Because for her, when she kind of asks Peter, what led you to become this person, right? When he kind of starts talking to her about like Uncle Ben's the reason why he does this, that Uncle Ben of course is dead in his reality, but the fact that he could have saved Uncle Ben and he didn't is the reason why he became a superhero the way that he did, and the idea that he could basically help other people and in a lot of ways atone for his past mistake. He basically runs off the statement, with great power, and then she finishes it, comes great responsibility. Now it should be, must come great responsibility. The fact that this is a lesson that Peter was taught by Uncle Ben tells Aunt May everything she needs to know, that it really is him. And that's what she kind of gives herself over and says, we thought like we lost you, right? We lost you and we didn't even get to say goodbye. And that's the important thing here, right? That's the important thing to understand. That's why Aunt May kept herself reserved in this part, right? Because if she had said like, okay, yeah, you're probably Peter, and let her whole self believe it, and then it turned out to just be some alternate reality version of Peter who was evil or something like that, but it wasn't like this alternate reality counterpart to the one that she knew, which is to say a good guy who fights the good fight and does what heroes do, then it would have broken her in her entirety, right? Like the inability of her to say goodbye, the chance that the fact that she never got to tell Peter that she was proud of him, that she loved him, right? To never say, like, to never be able to say, I'm sorry, or any of that stuff, right? To basically like confess or to kind of get to say her last goodbyes to him is something that's always haunted her. Having Peter here, this alternate reality version of Peter, even though she knows it's not her actual nephew, she knows it's not the Peter Parker from the Ultimate Universe, gives her a chance to effectively say goodbye, right? To say her goodbyes and indirectly say it to Peter Parker from Ultimate Universe to give her closure. It's basically what this does, something that she's never had this entire time. And so Miles Morales, looking out the window, realizes, okay, S.H.I.E.L.D's on their way, we need to go, right? Because S.H.I.E.L.D. is a lot more seedy in the Ultimate Universe than they are in the main Marvel Universe. In the main Marvel Universe, they're still kind of jerks, but like they're more inclined to work with you than against you. In the Ultimate Universe, they're like a police force almost, right? I mean, not specifically, but in terms of like how they function, right? Like they do their thing, and all there are just people who stand in the way is basically all that it is. But of course, Peter ends up saying goodbye to everybody here, and then of course he ends up getting in the car with Nick Fury, Miles Morales, and it's kind of a funny thing because Nick Fury asks like, is there a Nick Fury where you come from? And he's like, yeah, but he's kind of a white guy. And then like Nick Fury's like, sorry to hear that, man. Which is kind of a funny thing. But again, it gives Aunt May the closure she needs. And that's why when the story came out, it was so huge. It was wrapping up all these plot threads, right? All these little things that have been left hanging. And the reality is that if anybody but Brian Michael Bendis had taken this over, we probably would have never seen this, right? But Bendis started off with the Ultimate Spider-Man. He originally created it. It makes sense that he would basically end it here and kind of continue things on with Miles. And that's why Spider-Man is so important. It's one part wrapping up plot threads that Bendis never got to wrap up after the death of Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe and the Cataclysm story. And it was a way to kind of officially transition into Miles. And we'll find more, find out more why that's the case once we get to the end of this. But when he really meets with, Tony Stark, he's kind of like, okay, so there's a few differences here. Like one, the Tony Stark in my universe stopped drinking a while ago, which Nick Fury loves. And two, it's obvious this guy's not as smart. And so with Tony kind of being like, look, like I need to know where his home is. I need to know where your universe is. When Peter starts to point him in that direction, then it turns into, okay, then we could at the very least figure out how to get you back, right? We could figure out how to reverse engineer this stuff. Now, make no mistake, Tony Stark's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Tony Stark's doing this one part because he was directed by Nick Fury, but two, because he can get something out of it, right? I mean, this is a level of technology that Tony just doesn't have access to. Being able to attain this technology and use it for his own ends is a huge benefit, right? It's something that he desperately wants here. And so once they're basically looking at the broadcasts that Mysterio's been putting out, over the internet, all day long and for however many days he's been here, Miles picks up on the fact that one of these buildings is actually in Brooklyn, right? He's like, one of these buildings is in Brooklyn. I'm familiar with it. And so they know exactly where it is Mysterio is operating out of, right? They know his base of operations. Once they locate that, Nick Fury calls in everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean an entire S.H.I.E.L.D. strike team alongside Spider-Man and alongside the Ultimate Thor. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comments Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.